The dynasty dividing the nation.
The young ones, they believe Marcos had a good government.
Social media has spread lies faster and further than facts.
Foreign Correspondent, Thursday at 8 on ABC and ABC iView.
The tiny team turn their attention to 19th century Adelaide.
What an amazing image.
And an aerial extravaganza.
Above a river. Crazy.
Tiny Oz. Tomorrow 8:30 on ABC TV and streaming on ABC iView.
Good evening. It's Monday, the 2nd of May. Our top stories tonight: the rescue of civilians in Mariupol underway as dozens evacuated from the besieged steel plant. 9 arrested over a deadly building collapse in southeastern China. Scientists warn 1 billion people are at risk from a sweltering spring heat wave in India and Pakistan. And emotional scenes in New Zealand airports after the country reopens to more countries. You're watching The World. Hello, I'm Beverly O'Connor. Later, a very personal account of the Shanghai lockdown, now in its 2nd month. Well, the United Nations has confirmed the long-awaited rescue of civilians from Mariupol is underway, with dozens now evacuated from the city's besieged steel plant. They had to be helped out of the Azovstal steelworks after hiding in the vast network of tunnels and underground bunkers for more than 60 days. Hundreds more are still trapped in the plant. It's the last part of the city controlled by Ukrainian fighters who are making a desperate final stand.
We did not see any sunlight. We were scared. When the shells started landing there, I thought my heart would stop and we wouldn't survive.
Some of the civilians have been taken to temporary accommodation in a Russian-controlled area of Donetsk. Others will be taken to Ukrainian-held territory, but they'll have to travel across the front line where fierce battles are raging. The ABC's correspondent Nick Dole is in Shevchenko in southeastern Ukraine.
Across the fertile fields of Ukraine's southeast, a fierce battle is raging, and the momentum can change in an instant. Ukrainian troops have taken us near the front line. They've managed to push Russia back here. But a massive missile crater shows the power of Moscow's military assault. The soldiers here say Russian forces are throwing everything they can at this front now that they've pulled back from the capital, Kyiv.
They have much more weaponry, artillery, tanks and soldiers. But we're protecting our assets. The Russians don't hide theirs and they don't seem to care.
Ooh. You can hear the bangs in the distance. You can see the smoke over there. So that's the Russian front line. We can hear and now see in the distance. These are defensive trenches which the Ukrainians have dug quite quickly, just in case they are pushed further back. They say they haven't had to use them yet. There's an eerie quiet in the villages near the front line. Most people have left already, but 14-year-old Lesha and his family are staying. Why are you still living here when there are so many bombs around? This is normal, he replies. This is how it is now. So this is a result of Russian artillery, which you can probably hear right now. It was some distance from here, but we're told they are now moving more towards our position, so it's our cue to leave. And just moments later comes a deafening roar. It's a Ukrainian jet, we're told. It's firing flares to stop a potential missile from locking on. The stakes are high here. If Russia can make it north to Zaporizhzhia, it will tighten its grip on this region. For soldiers like Doc, it's personal.
In Zaporizhzhia, I have a family. I've got a wife and family to fight for, and a home to protect.
Motivation like that is helping drive Ukraine's defence, and it's foiling Vladimir Putin's plans. Nick Dole, ABC News, Shevchenko.
Chinese police have arrested 9 people over the collapse of a building in the country's southeast where several people remain trapped or missing. Police say the building's owner has been detained along with 3 others responsible for its construction. Another 5 were charged with writing a false safety report for the building which collapsed on Friday. Local authorities say dozens are still trapped inside or are unaccounted for. 2 have been rescued so far. May Day rallies in Europe marking International Labour Day have turned violent in some cities, with demonstrators clashing with police. Tensions flared in Paris when police in riot gear fired tear gas to disperse crowds and make arrests. Some protesters set fire to barricades and smashed bank and restaurant windows. The traditional May 1st rallies take place to honour workers and to demand better conditions and higher pay. However, German authorities say Berlin had one of its most peaceful May Day in years, only about a dozen arrests. Well, emotional scenes unfolded at Auckland Airport as visitors from 60 countries, including the US and UK, were today allowed to enter New Zealand without needing to quarantine. New Zealand did reopen to tourists from Australia 3 weeks ago, but travellers from India, China and other non-visa waiver countries are still not allowed to enter. Tourists need to be fully vaccinated and get tested for COVID before and after arriving. Those who finally made the trip were relieved to be able to do so.
It was about 3 years between when we saw each other. We met in Japan, and you had already come back to New Zealand when we decided to make a go of it romantically, and could have planned better.
Quite a tough task. Well, the Prime Minister is trying to manage expectations ahead of tomorrow's interest rates decision, saying any change would not be a judgment on his government's economic management. The Reserve Bank is tipped to lift the official cash rate, which is at a record low level for the first time since 2010. Now, if that happens, it would be the first rate rise during an election campaign in 15 years. Melissa Clark is in Canberra.
The economy is made up of many moving parts. With inflation going up, the Reserve Bank will consider its next move tomorrow, with expectations it may raise the cash rate from the record low of 0.1%.
Australians have been insulating themselves over the course of the pandemic to deal with these shocks that they knew would be coming.
Sometimes you get lucky.
The Prime Minister is looking for insulation too, saying any hip pocket pain from a rate rise is not a reflection of his government's handling of the economy.
It's not about politics. So tomorrow, it's not about me, it's not about Mr Albanese, it's about Australians themselves.
Despite directly linking economic management and interest rate moves moments earlier.
How we manage the economy, how we manage the government's finances will impact potentially on what happens to rates.
Whether the Reserve Bank raises interest rates this week or next month, Scott Morrison's economic credibility is in tatters.
Labor wants to see wage growth to counter the impact of inflation on cost of living.
Scott Morrison seems to think that people are doing it easy in this country. The truth is they're not.
Where's the best place to get a cup of tea around here?
The Coalition is promising to expand access to the Commonwealth Seniors Card, so an extra 50,000 self-funded retirees benefit from cheaper healthcare and discount medicines.
It'll mean that they will have less anxiety about those healthcare costs. So that will be very welcome.
The pitch was immediately matched by Labor.
Where there's a good idea, we will support it.
In this election campaign, the stakes are as high as the policy contest is narrow. The Coalition wanted a battle on economic management, and Labor has happily adopted the theme, knowing any increase in interest rates, even the prospect of a rate rise, will bite hard in some marginal electorates where this election contest could be won or lost. Melissa Clark, ABC News, Canberra.
India and Pakistan continue to swelter through heatwave conditions which have sparked hundreds of forest fires and power outages. Scientists warn 1 billion people are at risk, with experts blaming climate change for an early onset of these high summer temperatures. Our South Asia correspondent Avani Dice joins us now from New Delhi. Avani, give us a sense, you're in Delhi, of the intensity of this current heatwave.
Bev, to give you a bit of a visceral example, we no longer need hot water systems here in Delhi because the pipes are heating up so much that when you turn the cold water on, it's too hot to touch. This country has seen record-breaking heat temperatures across the last couple of months, and the intensity and the early timing of this heat wave is like nothing that's seen before in the 120 years that India has been recording temperatures. So people are really suffering day to day, and it is people from poorer backgrounds who are mainly facing the brunt of this. I'm among the 13% of Indian households lucky enough to have access to air conditioning, and that just shows you such a large proportion of this country is facing this heat wave and dealing with these temperatures without much to abate that situation. And it's the people who are day to day out in the streets working 24/7, labourers, food vendors, people who are forced to stay outside in order to make money, who are facing the brunt of these hot temperatures. The last 7 days in New Delhi alone, we've seen temperatures of above 40 degrees. Right now, the sun's setting, it's getting into the evening, and it's still 40 degrees as I'm talking to you now. And that just shows you that there is little reprieve, even overnight, when usually you would be able to cool down. So it has been a very difficult few days for people in this country. And as you mentioned, Bev, power supply has now become the next issue. Because of the Ukraine war, India was struggling with coal imports. Coal is its major power supplier. And now, because people are using their air cons so much through this heat wave, electricity demand is at a record high for April. And that has led to a coal shortage as well as power outages across the country.
Yeah. You know, when you talk about that kind of heat and only 13% having access to some sort of cooling devices, how do people cope?
People have different strategies to deal with this. Some people in poorer neighbourhoods, in slums, are wetting white blankets. They're putting them up around their houses to absorb some of that heat, especially overnight. But there have been some state governments which have put in forced measures in order to help people deal with the heat wave. In Karnataka, in the south of the country, which is also dealing with intense humidity at this time of the year, people are forced to take breaks from 11 a.m. till 3 p.m. In the state of Odisha, which is further north, schools have been shut for the week because of these intense temperatures. Given chalk to put white on their tin roofs in order to deal with some of those temperatures. But there are concerns from researchers that not enough is being done on a national level from the Indian government. The Indian government, although it does deal with heat waves year on year, it hasn't seen heat waves this early in the year, in the March, April, and now the early May situation. It usually comes towards the end of May and June. And there have been warnings and concerns from researchers saying that India needs a national plan to deal with these heat waves to ensure that hospitals have enough stocks to help people with health concerns as a result of this situation. To give you an example of how severe heat waves can be, in 2015 in India, more than 2,000 people died as a result of hot temperatures. So there are concerns about the health consequences here as well.
Yeah, that would be, that death toll alone would be terrible. And what about, you know, you're talking about the coal shortages. What broader economic impact is this having?
Well, aside from the coal issue, Bev, and there has been a push from researchers for India to decarbonise, to move to more renewable energies, but the Modi government has said that it needs support from international industrial countries, including like Australia, if it is to do that as a developing nation. But aside from that issue, the second biggest export for India is wheat. And wheat exports have been in high demand again since the Ukraine war, and food shortages to do with that. So India is trying to plug that gap while also trying to feed its population domestically. But these intense and hot temperatures have led to wheat crops dying across the country, leading to economic losses for farmers in rural areas as well. So there are concerns about what effects that will have long term when an entire season's crop has been destroyed due to this situation.
Yeah, Anthony. Terrible and probably not a lot of end in sight. Good to talk and stay safe and cool as much as you can.
Thanks, Bev.
Well, the COVID-19 pandemic has cost Australians tens of billions of dollars, but one Canberra-based company made astonishing profits. The privately owned healthcare company Aspen Medical was awarded more than $1 billion in government contracts without even a public tender. And as Linton Besser reports, it's embroiled in an international money laundering investigation.
Thanks. I think we're right on time.
When the pandemic hit in 2020, millions of face masks were urgently needed.
The government has secured an additional 54 million masks.
The federal government gave PPE contracts worth $1.1 billion to Aspen Medical, a Canberra company with blue-chip political connections. The company's former chairman and co-founder, Andrew Walker, has told Four Corners he was shocked Aspen Medical got those contracts.
Oh, we'd never done that before.
It had never procured face masks?
Never.
Mr Walker left Aspen Medical in 2019 and is now locked in litigation with the company's owner. Four Corners has obtained a letter of commendation written and signed by Health Minister Greg Hunt in late February 2020, which describes Aspen Medical as
a world-recognised nationally awarded company
and
a trusted supplier of health services to the Australian government.
Greg Hunt's letter was undated and addressed to whom it may concern.
It's extraordinarily unusual and, in fact, dangerous for a minister, or in fact for a public servant, to actually have any contact, any engagement, and certainly to write a letter of this kind.
In a statement, Mr Hunt's office said the letter was
written to support Aspen Medical in tendering for work in the United States and is appropriate.
It said
the Minister was not involved in any purchasing recommendations, assessments, approvals, contract negotiations or decisions.
Aspen Medical told the ABC it was well positioned for the PPE contracts it received because of its previous clinical work in Australia and overseas. Elsewhere in the world, Aspen Medical has become embroiled in a criminal investigation into corruption and money laundering. Sri Lankan police discovered payments now worth $2 million to a mysterious British Virgin Islands company.
I'm really shocked at it, that a thing like this should have happened. I thought even in Australia there will be checks and balances, right?
In a statement, Aspen Medical said it had not been approached by any government agency or court of law and would support any such inquiry. It said its values would preclude it from working with corrupt organisations. Linton Besser, ABC News.
Italy's Prime Minister has told his country they must choose between peace in Ukraine or air conditioning. Under new rules, public buildings won't be allowed to cool below 27 degrees in an attempt to conserve the nation's gas supplies. Now, the war in Ukraine, harsh sanctions and concerns about Russian retaliation have European nations looking for other sources of energy. Senior Research Fellow at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies, Adi Imsirovic, joins us now. Adi, great to talk again. This is a real reality test for many people who feel very strongly about the war in Ukraine. Do you see them complying?
Well, absolutely. I think it's a very, very a clever decision by the government of Mario Draghi, and it's a bit of a breath of fresh air coming from Italy after Bunga Bunga Berlusconi and his policies. What happens? Let's remind ourselves this is to do with public buildings. So there is a problem with public buildings where people who turn the thermostats on and off, they actually don't pay the bills. In economics, we call it a market failure. So actually, it does make a lot of sense for the government to get involved. And actually, the savings for such a policy are amazingly large. You'd be surprised, Beverly. I think they could probably save up to 1 billion cubic meters of gas per year by just doing this policy, which is huge. And in that way, sort of pay less to Mr. Putin and his war machine.
Yeah. Do you see other initiatives like this coming into force elsewhere in Europe?
I concede that, Beverly, because certainly the International Energy Agency, which is the OECD sort of group, looking into these issues, has come with a 10-point plan, and this was one of those points out they're recommending. The other points are sort of diversifying supplies, looking at alternative sources of energy such as renewables and also nuclear, and also looking at sort of a demand response in sort of retail sector. So certainly we are seeing that, and the UK has recently come up with a new strategy as well, which involves a lot more nuclear and renewables. So certainly European governments are definitely responding to the current threat.
Yeah. The issue with those alternative renewables, different forms of energy, is that they can't happen necessarily that quickly. They are in train, but how soon, how feasible an option are they at this point to replace Russian oil and gas?
Excellent question there. I think, first of all, the first one, that there's been a lot of debate here in Europe about Germany shutting the nuclear plants. I mean, you can just not shut them down. So that's pretty quick. The other ones is offshore wind and onshore wind. Onshore wind is particularly quick, I think, can be done in a matter of months. So I think, probably the most important measures are efficiency measures and trying to sort of, just like Mr. Draghi said, turn the sort of thermostats up a little bit in the summer and down in the winter. Definitely goes a long way to cut those energy bills. So it's doable. It's going to be very, very hard for Europe. There's no doubt about it, but I think it's definitely doable, by the way.
Yeah, that's interesting. There are going to be emergency talks held at some point during this week. Germany says, you know, that there is no consensus at this point. Hungary is not happy. They are saying they don't agree with cutting off Russian gas. Will there be consensus, and does there need to be consensus?
Well, for Europe, you know, it's a political issue for Europe that there has to be consensus to make such a decision. But there can be what we call unilateral or voluntary measures that can be done. It's the problem that Europe has is that different countries have very different exposure to Russian energy. Hungary, for example, depends on Russian gas 100%. So it's not a surprise that they are completely against at the moment, the only party out there against. Then we move on to somebody like Germany that gets almost half of their gas from Russia, where they know there'll be a massive pain and massive hit to the economy, so they would like to do it gradually over time. And then we have countries like Poland that have been already cut off, and they're quite happy to say, listen, we don't need this, let's go and do it. So, you know, it's not very, very easy within the European Union, but we are definitely seeing measures being gradually implemented, and I think they will gradually get implemented. Probably we'll start with oil and then move on to gas. And let's not forget that Europe has already decided to be 2/3 gas independent from Russia by next year. So it's a very ambitious plan already, and I think they'll have to work very hard on that. And I think I can see many countries like Poland, like Greece, like Bulgaria working on those.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Poland and Bulgaria. They, as you point out, were cut off by Russia for not agreeing to their insistence that they pay in Russian rubles. How is the rest of the EU helping those two nations manage this in the short term?
Well, they've worked already pretty hard before the actual war in Ukraine. So for example, Poland is an excellent example. They've already done a lot. They have LNG terminal, which imports a good chunk of their consumption, and they can actually import for other European countries as well. They've just finished a link with the Baltic republics, a pipeline link literally last week. They've speeded up that process, and they finished that link, and they'll be able to import Norwegian gas all the way into Poland. So Poland is in a very good place. Bulgaria is slightly different situation. Bulgaria actually is not a big consumer of gas, but their import is highly dependent on Russian gas. However, by June, I think they also managed to connect. It's called an interconnector coming from Greece. Well, they connect to Greece, and then they'll be able to get LNG from Greece as well. So they're all working very, very hard on that. And together with all the plan that Italy started importing more gas from Algeria, more LNG, and so on, I think Europe is working extremely hard on that. And I can actually see them meet those 2/3 sort of independence from Russian gas by sometime next year anyway.
Yeah. You know, we're in the middle of an election campaign, as you may be aware, Adi, and some of the politicians here are arguing that, you know, the net zero target by 2050 is impossible, that many countries can't do it, that they're returning to coal. What is your overview in terms of how the rest of the country is moving to renewables and changing the way they're going about energy provision?
Beverly, if one thing we can learn from the current situation, this terrible, terrible war in Europe, is the sooner we can get away from fossil fuels, the better. The sooner we can stop begging, you know, despots and various sort of people who are not particularly democratic, not to name them, I think the better. You know, these arguments that it's too difficult are just not right. Look at, you've just had a very good piece on situation in India. Climate change is here and it's real, and we definitely need to do something about it right now. Australia, and I know Australia very well because my wife's Australian, it's got fantastic opportunity to use natural resources such as sun, such as wind, and so on, to actually move on to renewables and move away from these terrible fossil fuels that are not only dirty, but actually, as you can see, actually are a big cause of wars and conflicts in the world.
Adi, some very wise words. Good to talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you too.
Homeowners will face rising interest rates and in some parts of the country falling house prices, and this is especially worrying for nearly 300,000 Australians who've taken out high-risk mortgage loans.
Tara Higginson took out a loan more than 6 times her income to build her dream home. She worries that when interest rates rise, she could lose this place.
I'm 100% at risk of having to sell the property, and that would, kill me to say goodbye to it.
Miss Higginson isn't alone in facing the prospect of financial stress. Out of 1 million new home loans written over the past 2 years, about 280,000 Australians have borrowed 6 or more times their income or put down a deposit of less than 10%.
The number of people in what we call mortgage stress will increase from around 10% to 20%. Now, that's a lot.
That could spark a housing sell-off. The property market is already losing steam. Prices rose just 0.6% in April, which is the lowest rate since October 2020. Most cities and the regions recorded gains above 1%, but values in Sydney and Hobart fell, while in Melbourne they stayed flat.
Economists say the housing market will further cool as interest rates rise. The Reserve Bank is expected to deliver consecutive hikes, possibly starting as soon as tomorrow. That's raised questions about whether the banking watchdog APRA could have acted sooner to prevent lenders from handing out big loans.
Perhaps that thinking was a bit slow, and that's going to lead to a number of borrowers potentially more than we would have hoped in a really difficult position.
I think that organisations like mine will receive more and more calls from people in financial stress.
Tara Higginson warns people need to be careful taking on too much debt like she did.
Owning a house is the Australian dream. It's what everyone wants, but make sure that the banks can't take it away.
Like many other Australians, she will now be working even harder to hold on to that dream. Nasim Khadem, ABC News.
Australia's Muslim community has celebrated the end of the holy month of Ramadan, and with eased COVID restrictions, it was the first time in 2 years people could attend the festival in person.
A community reunited. Muslims from across the capital turned out in droves to celebrate the end of Ramadan and break their month-long dawn to sunset fast.
This is very significant. People are very happy and people are participating. You look at around here, people are joyfully participate on the Salah and come to that Salah because of easing the restriction.
The day of Eid al-Fitr begins with a communal service, and after 2 years of marking the occasion from home, many were excited to return in person.
Over the past few years with the pandemic, it's been so hard for people to come out. So with the restrictions settling a bit, so good, nice to see everyone together again.
This is the first time after 2 years COVID, and we enjoy a lot.
Yeah, we pray from home, but it's not like when you come outside to see people.
Over 1,000 people attended the two services in Canberra's north this morning, with many more expected in the coming years.
Canberra Muslim community are growing their members, and in the near future we got more people in there.
It was a day full of sweet treats and celebration.
Yeah, this is definitely the best part.
The community are hoping they've seen their last Eid under COVID restrictions. Emma Thompson, ABC News, Canberra.
The Prince of Wales has announced a plan to protect 70 ancient woodlands and 70 trees across the UK in honour of the Queen's 70-year reign. The apple tree, which inspired Sir Isaac Newton to work on his law of gravity, and the woodland that inspired Winnie the Pooh's 100-acre wood are among those included. In a message recorded for the campaign, he urged people to help protect the environment.
We need to replenish these precious, dwindling assets for future generations and for our depleted landscapes and townscapes.
Our top stories tonight on the world. Ukraine's military is calling for at least one more evacuation round to get hundreds of civilians out of the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol. Chinese police have arrested 9 people over the collapse of a building, with fears more than 20 are still trapped in the rubble. And authorities are warning 1 billion people are at risk from an early spring heatwave in India and Pakistan. Well, let's return to Ukraine, where around 100 civilians have been evacuated from a steel plant in the besieged southern city of Mariupol after weeks of being trapped in deteriorating conditions. Roughly 1,000 more are still sheltering inside the vast complex. Alongside them are around 2,000 Ukrainian fighters who have sworn to fight until the bitter end.
After 60 days in darkness, they can finally crawl into the daylight. Above ground, they pick through the rubble, the remains of their place of refuge. They've lived in a maze of tunnels below this vast steel plant for weeks, the only way to survive the Russian bombardment. Svetoslav was 6 months old yesterday. Nearly half his life has been underground. Supplies have been cut off for weeks. The children were hungry, this woman says. More than 100 people have been allowed to leave. Their horror is over for now.
I can't believe it. 2 months of darkness. When we were in the bus, I told my husband we won't have to go to the toilet with a torch and use a bag as a loo.
The Azovstal steel plant is one of the biggest in the world. A unit of Ukrainian fighters has tried to hold on to the site as this once vibrant European city was pounded by the Russians. Civilians took shelter underground alongside them, but the bombing was relentless. The Azov group claim that even their hospital was targeted.
People have all variety of injuries. It's fragmentation wounds, it's shredded wounds, it's lacerations, it's the fractures, it's the bullet wounds, wound channels, it's amputations, serious condition, in critical condition. And there are a couple of hundreds of them.
But now there is a glimmer of hope. It will be a tense wait to see if more will make it out of this city alive.
Around 100 civilians are expected here in Zaporizhzhia tomorrow, but there are hundreds more still trapped within the steelworks, and there are thought to be 100,000 people within the city of Mariupol itself. That gives you an idea of the scale of the operation still to come. Talks are underway, but I'm told those negotiations are delicate, tense and complicated. Everyone wants to see this succeed.
A US delegation has warned Vladimir Putin that America will continue to back Ukraine until the war is won. The comment came from the Speaker of the US House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, after a meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv. Our North America correspondent, Barbara Miller.
President Volodymyr Zelensky would actually quite like Joe Biden to visit Kyiv. That's still considered too risky. So last week he sent the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, along with the Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin. Now we've had Nancy Pelosi visit with a small delegation of Democratic lawmakers. Now, she's actually the highest-ranking U.S. official to visit Kyiv so far, to offer assurances to the Ukrainians of continued U.S. support. Now, that's what we saw her doing in a video released from a sit-down meeting that she had with Volodymyr Zelensky and members of his team. She said that America would continue to support Ukraine until the war was done, until the fight was over. We understand that that meeting lasted for several hours. Nancy Pelosi and that small team of lawmakers, though, didn't comment until they were safely back in Poland.
Do not be bullied by bullies. If they're making threats, you cannot back down. That's my view of it, that we're there for the fight, and you cannot fold.
There's broad bipartisan support for continuing to fund Ukraine. $20 million US of that $33 billion package is for military aid, the rest earmarked for economic and humanitarian aid. The trouble that Joe Biden faces is that he's linked that bill to a COVID relief bill worth a further $10 billion. And some Republicans are not happy about that, because that bill in turn, and the complex workings there at Congress, is linked by some Republican lawmakers to a Trump-era immigration policy. So it looks like at this stage that Joe Biden is going to have to uncouple the COVID bill from the Ukraine bill if he wants the passage of that Ukraine bill, the further Ukraine bill, to be smooth. But of course, the Democrats at this stage are not saying that they'll do that. When asked about it, Nancy Pelosi said, well, these are both emergencies. Ukraine is an emergency and COVID is an emergency, so it's totally legitimate to link the two. So yes, there is broad bipartisan support for continuing this money chain, this financial assistance to Ukraine, but there's going to be some debate about how exactly that bill passes both houses.
China's commercial capital, Shanghai, has reported 58 new COVID infections outside of its lockdown areas, placing the country's COVID-0 future under heightened scrutiny. Some residents have faced stay-at-home orders for more than 2 months, leading to food supply shortages and a fair bit of public backlash. China Director at the Economist Intelligence Unit, Matty Bakink, is still in lockdown. She says the restrictions have taken a very personal toll.
It's really boring to some extent. You know, living through history has probably never been so dull, because it varies a little bit from person to person. Everyone's experiences are different. In our community, we have been in the strict form of lockdown, which means we're not meant to leave our homes, since the 1st of April, so more than a month now. We are, however, tested every day. So usually somewhere between 8:30 and 9 a.m., somebody walks through in a hazmat suit with a megaphone, calling different house numbers, and then we need to drop everything and run downstairs, queue up to take a PCR test that is done in the throat, not the nose, thankfully. And then the rest of the day we're at home. We have had some issues in our community where people do come down to smoke or to gather in groups and chat. So the other thing that we have very often is somebody walking up and down our lane with a megaphone, with a recording, kind of extolling us to obey the restrictions and to not leave our homes. Don't come down to chat. Don't come down to smoke. Only come down to do your test. It's quite a monotonous kind of background. I would say the work weeks or the work days are slightly better than the weekends or the holidays, because at least, you know, you're working and there's online school for some of the children. But it's pretty monotonous and intense. And, you know, I can say also, after only leaving my home to do COVID tests for more than a month, you do get a bit stir crazy.
Yeah, and just physically not to be active in any way. You've got 2 small children in an apartment. It must be very difficult to explain to them why they are locked up.
Yes, you know, they have a lot of frustrating moments for children, and I have little boys. They want to be running outside. The weather's getting nice and inside. The only time they get to be moving outside is when they go for their COVID tests. We let them go on their scooters to the tests so they get that kind of bit of movement. Their football club has done some online trainings for them, and I try and make them do exercise every day. I find little videos for us to do or something to try and keep them active. They don't love it, but I feel like after so much time, that much inactivity is just really not great for young children.
Yeah. The food supply has been very complicated. Give us a sense of what provisions you have. Are they very basic provisions? What have you run out of?
It's been a really challenging and actually time-consuming part of this whole experience. So the food insecurity in the beginning, when the lockdowns were extended beyond the initial 4 days, was actually quite stressful, mostly again because I was more concerned about making sure we had enough for the children, and we were running out of fresh food, fresh fruits, fresh vegetables. We did have frozen food because we'd stocked up on it, but we live in a community with some elderly or more vulnerable people who don't have resources, and they were really, running out of basic supplies, and there was real concern and real hunger. So when we were able to get some food, we shared it, of course, with our neighbors. And that has been one bright spot that neighbors really share. We do a lot of bartering. There's kind of a community group chat, and people say what they need, and then they can exchange for it. I will tell you that Coke is more valuable than Pepsi for sure in exchanges. But that was, I guess a surprise to some, but the cola wars were definitely decided, at least in Shanghai. And it's been now that we have group bulk buying through our community, it is a bit better, but you need to hit a certain number of orders in order to get the delivery. And what you can get delivered and when is always a little bit hit and missed. And so, for us as a family, we're a Dutch family, we're accustomed to eating cheese, for example. We live in a very local community where cheese and butter, those types of things are not high on the priority list. So we had a period of time that we couldn't get those things. And I will say we have also gotten some supplies from the government in addition to our own purchases, but I'm not sure I'm ever going to eat cabbage again after this experience because we have had more cabbage, and I like cabbage, but there does become a point where it's just enough. So I think not having control and then spending a lot of time and energy trying to keep track of bulk purchases, and then every once in a while you'll have this amazing moment where you can find something that you can order in a smaller amount for a private consumption, but it tends to be very expensive.
I mean, you're trying to leave China. How complicated is that during this kind of lockdown?
We're not leaving China permanently. We will come back and continue to live here, but we've decided to push forward our departure for the summer when we'd intended to go visit family because of the situation. In particular for the children, they can return to in-person school in the Netherlands and also just have a slightly more normal life. It is a little bit complicated, but there's now been enough people doing it that you can kind of follow the paths of those who've already done it. You do need to get a special permission from your neighborhood committee to leave the community. My neighborhood committee has indicated they will provide it to us. Getting to the airport itself can be quite complicated because public transport is closed. There are now maybe a few taxis starting to be on the street. I don't know. I haven't been out on the street in a very long time, but you have to kind of book a car that has the permissions to cross districts and to actually get to the airport. And when people were first starting to leave several weeks ago, they were charging exorbitant fees. Now it's slightly more reasonable, but there's just a lot of logistics, and you need a PCR test and also an antigen test before you get to the airport and then to board your flight. So it feels very overwhelming when you look at the list of things you need to do. But actually, from what I've heard, once you just kind of tick off each item on the list and get to the airport, people are departing. Yeah. Unless their flights are canceled, which of course is a risk.
And because then they get stuck, do they not just get sort of stranded at the airport? They're not allowed to go back?
That is a real concern, because once you have the permission to leave your community, it varies slightly based on the neighborhood committee, but in theory, you are not then able to return home. So, if then your flight is canceled, you are stuck at the airport, or you can try and find an airport hotel, but that can also be tricky because not all of them will accept foreigners.
Have you been surprised at how publicly people have been venting their anger?
Yes and no. What I've been surprised to see is just the fact that it's taken on kind of a life of its own to some extent. You know, you really have seen people, particularly in my community and in others I've talked to in Shanghai. You know, Shanghai is a really industrious city. It's been proud of being, you know, the economic powerhouse of China, of being well functioning, of being orderly. And so when we first went into lockdown, you know, people trusted the government and believed that this would be a 4-day lockdown and that very soon we'll be back to business as usual. So the disillusionment and then the frustration with the way it's been kind of very clumsily managed is something that's been noteworthy to me. Also, candidly, though, when people are hungry or frustrated or, you know, can't get out of their homes, it's inevitable that that will rise to the surface. And, you know, my heart actually goes out to the neighborhood committees and the volunteers who are actually trying to implement these policies, because it's very hard for them too. And they have a lot of pressure to, you know, maintain order and to obey a kind of range of rules that seem to be changing quite often. And there's a lot of leeway at the local level, but that also puts a lot of pressure and responsibility on those individuals, many of whom, as I said, are volunteers. So it pressure for everybody. You know, I think most people try to find some sense of grace and humor, because otherwise you would probably lose your mind.
Maddie, let's hope you do get out and have that break that you've been trying for. Appreciate you giving us a sense of what you're going through. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
Well, after 3 long decades, the fight for justice for an American man murdered in Sydney is nearing an end. Scott Johnson was found dead at the base of a Sydney cliff back in 1988. Today, his family and partner recounted the horror of their loss in a Sydney court. His killer, Scott White, is due to be sentenced tomorrow. And just a warning, this story does contain some offensive language.
From the United States to a Sydney Supreme Court, a 33-year quest for answers has led the Johnsons here.
Very emotional, but we had a chance to look the offender in the eyes. I don't think I took my eyes off of him most of the time I was talking.
Mathematician Scott Johnson's body was found at the bottom of a cliff at Sydney's North Head in 1988. Mr Johnson met Scott White at a bar in Manly. They went to North Head, where Mr Johnson undressed. White hit him and Mr Johnson fell. The prosecution says it was motivated by Mr Johnson's sexuality. This was a grave and serious murder which entailed a high degree of criminality. White's ex-wife Helen told the court he often bragged about bashing gay men. She said after she saw an article about Mr Johnson's death, she asked him if he did it. He said the only good poofter is a dead poofter. It's not my fault the dumb ran off the cliff. The defence suggested that conversation never happened and put to Miss White her motivation for coming forward was a $1 million reward at the time. The court heard White himself was gay and had long worried about his brother discovering his sexuality. Michael Noon spoke of the horror of losing his partner. It plunged me into a period of profound grief. We were best friends. Suddenly, I was without the very person I needed the most. Mr Johnson's siblings spoke to the court in succession. Seeing the story told and retold brings on the horror of picturing what Scott must have felt as he was falling to his death. I don't wish Mr White suffering. I do wish he be met with justice for the 33 years, 4 months and 22 days and counting since he took my brother's life. The family hopes the saga is at a close.
We don't like the word closure, but I think peace is probably appropriate. That's certainly the way I feel.
White will be sentenced tomorrow. Tim Swanston, ABC News, Sydney.
Well, it's the holy grail of aviation, flying from the east coast of Australia direct to London or New York. Qantas has announced it's pressing ahead with the service while it's still recovering from the impacts of the pandemic.
From Sydney to New York or London in one hit, 20 hours on an ultra-long-haul flight certainly isn't for everyone.
This is our longest one for both of us, 14 hours, so another 6 on top of that wouldn't be great.
It sounds a bit crazy, to be honest, 20-hour flights.
Off the back of its most popular route, Perth to London, Qantas is banking passengers will be lining up for the next round of ultra-long-haul flights when they take off in 2025.
These flights are only a little bit longer from what you get today.
Confident the pandemic is behind it, the airline is spending big on up to 300 aircraft, including 12 new A350s, which will be specially fitted out for long-haul flights. They'll include an exercise zone and more room in economy, although most of the seats will be premium.
It's not going to be for your backpackers wanting to go on their great European holiday.
The planes will emit 25% less carbon per seat.
If you go to travel agent, Google Flights, anything online, you can actually see your carbon emission before you decide on which airplane to fly on.
Qantas tested the flights in 2019, but the project was put on hold when the pandemic hit. It posted a $1.7 billion loss last year.
And we always said that Qantas needed to transform to survive. We were 11 weeks from going bankrupt in 2020.
The headaches aren't over for Qantas. Recently, there have been issues with staff shortages and frustrated customers facing delays getting refunds. Qantas has ambitions to expand the ultra-long-haul flights to Brisbane and Melbourne. Phoebe Bowden, ABC News, Sydney.
Well, while many umpires are used to facing scrutiny for their on-field skills, many female AFL umpires say their gender has seen them become a target for constant harassment and discrimination. A University of Sydney report has revealed the extent of the abuse for women working in community and state AFL leagues. Some say it's been so bad that they've decided to leave the sport entirely. Here's Andrea Niehoff.
Kimberly Boyce has umpired for more than 2 decades, but says some things are slow to change.
I have had my source of, negative abuse on the field and sometimes off the field, and it's not just coming from the men, it is coming from females as well on the sidelines.
While her love of the game has endured, for other women the experience has been marred by harassment and abuse. University of Sydney lecturer and former AFLW umpire Dr Victoria Rawlings says some found it too much to handle.
This led to a lot of anxiety, some mental health problems, sometimes eating disorders, and sometimes leaving umpiring.
Along with another former AFL official, she spoke to dozens of women umpiring state and community footy games. Some were told to ignore any problems they were having, of the feeling of constantly having to prove themselves and a sometimes total lack of support, plus more serious reports of sexism and outright hostility. One umpire said she was sent nude photos and touched inappropriately by other umpires during games, while another woman said the only way she got through it was to accept the boys' club mentality.
The revelations come just weeks after the AFL announced a crackdown on bad behaviour directed at umpires during games, and almost 2 months after the launch of its national female umpire mentorship program. With female umpires making up just 10% of the national total, it's unlikely that this will see more women willing to sign up.
Some women highlighted the effort their clubs had made to include them and the positive impact this had had on their careers. But many say they are the minority.
We're supposed to be a sporting nation. Well, let's put words into actions and make this happen and make it possible for our women to be given the pathways, to be given the opportunities, to be able to participate and become really good umpires.
Without umpires, female, males, whatever you identify as, that if you don't have us, there is no game.
Andrea Niehoff, ABC News, Melbourne.
AFL Premiers Melbourne will rebrand for the upcoming Indigenous round and go by the name the Naarm Football Club. Naarm is the Aboriginal name for Melbourne in the language of the Woiwurrung, the traditional owners of the city and the surrounding land. The club says it'll take on the name for the round 10 match against North Melbourne and at its home game at the MCG against Fremantle in the Sir Doug Nicholls round the following week. Melbourne says it's been working with the Woiwurrung for 2 years and has been given permission to use the Naarm name.
And we've come a long way, I think just the awareness that it brings, changing the name, the jerseys, there'll be little kids here watching us play, asking their parents what the name means, and that'll start conversations, and the flow-on effect from that is huge.
The Melbourne AFLW side will also be renamed Naarm and will wear a new Indigenous jersey, Guernsey, during the next Women's Indigenous round. Let's get the weather. Here's Paul Higgins.
The mild weather our nation's southeast has been enjoying is about to come to an icy end. Tomorrow afternoon, this strong cold front will bring a few showers to South Australia and further into the southeast on Wednesday, but the coldest air won't arrive until after the front. A few showers over the Pilbara and inland Queensland with a flow of mid-level cloud, coastal showers in southern WA and Queensland with onshore winds. Closer in, a shower or two on Queensland's east coast, the central and southern interior south of Longreach, and also up on the North Tropical coast. In Brisbane, the chance of a shower. Mostly sunny across New South Wales, apart from a shower or two on the far north coast. Morning fog in the south and east, including Sydney's west and in Canberra. Early fog for northern and eastern Victoria, then mostly sunny before cloud builds from the west. Late showers in the southwest, partly cloudy in Melbourne. Windy in Tasmania, showers in the west, north and central areas, increasing in the west at night. A cloudy one coming up for Hobart. A dry morning for South Australia, showers in the afternoon near the western and southern coasts, spreading across agricultural areas in the evening, especially in the south. Dry in Adelaide until some evening showers. Most of Western Australia will be dry, but there'll be showers over the southern coastal districts, partly cloudy in Perth. Showers and possibly thunderstorms for the inland Pilbara and the central interior, and also about the northeast Arnhem, Lassiter and southern Tanami districts in the Territory. Blue skies in Darwin.
Tonight's top story is on the world. Ukraine's military is calling for at least one more evacuation round to get hundreds of civilians who are still stuck at the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol. Chinese police have arrested 9 people over the collapse of a building in the country's southeast. Fears more than 20 people are still trapped in the rubble. And authorities are warning 1 billion people are at risk from an early spring heat wave across India and Pakistan. And that is your world this Monday. You can watch the show on iView. There are more world news and interviews at the ABC's YouTube channel. I'm Bev O'Connor. See you tomorrow night. Bye-bye.
Tomorrow on News Breakfast, tightening the purse strings. We'll look ahead to the crucial Reserve Bank decision on interest rates and what it could mean for households.
And one of our favourites, Alice Azavsky, is here with some tasty dishes on a budget. See you then.
What's empathy training and have you ever had it?
No, I haven't, Lee.
Can you please stand back a bit? Thank you.
Wasn't it a serious conflict of interest getting involved in any way in that grand process?
It's not just about whether it's within the rules, it's about the way it looks.
Lifting wages will have an impact.
Yeah, but how do you lift wages?
There are 9 ministers for housing in this country. What are they all doing?
1,000 jobs. Address the question.
Now is the time to speak.
7:30, Monday to Thursday, ABC TV and ABC iView.
Charlie Pickering is back on the campaign trail.
We've got a live audience for the first time in 2 years.
Making sense of the mayhem.
I don't like to make predictions, but if he gets long COVID, he could ride this all the way to a second term.
The Weekly, Wednesday 8:30 on ABC TV and ABC iView. The resurrection of a family that brought the Philippines to its knees.
Absolute power, there's absolute corruption.
Now the dictator's son is poised to be president.
I can't describe the energy that's here on the street for Bongbong Marcos.
The dynasty dividing the nation.
The young ones, they believe Marcos had a good government.
Social media has spread lies faster and further than facts.
Foreign Correspondent, Thursday at 8 on ABC and ABC iView.
Coming up on Q&A, a one-on-one special with Anthony Albanese. Has he got what it takes to be our next Prime Minister? Is he doing enough to win your vote? Australia is facing some big challenges: rising living expenses, mounting government debt and threats to our national security. So, what is Labor's plan? This is your chance to put your questions directly to the opposition leader in the final stretch of the campaign.
Q&A, Thursday 8:30 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Don't waste your life surfing and smoking pot with a bunch of hippies.
I know guys in Australia who make customized wetsuits and surf trunks who make it work.
Setting alight a national service uniform in an advertisement for surf brand Lightweight.
Men died for that uniform, mate, and you just bloody set it alight. Do you know what the street value of that little packet is? I need the money. Just walk away.
Barron's. Log in to ABC iView to stream the series.
Everybody say babies!
Babies! A new season brings new joy.
Congratulations.
And new romance.
What's all this?
The evidence suggests you've got an admirer.
But it's not all celebration.
Nonata's house is going private.
We have to find another way ahead, or Nonata's house will not be serving anyone.
And faith will be tested.
It is not my body that has failed.
Call the Midwife. Saturday on ABC TV and ABC iView.
This election, it's easy to get lost amongst the polls, policies and pledges. Now there's an easy way to find out how your views compare to the major parties. Go online to Vote Compass, answer a few quick questions. You may be surprised where you stand on the political spectrum. Go to abc.net.au/Australia Votes.
My fellow Australians, right now everyone wants to buy your vote. So we're back to show you how your democracy is being sold and bring you all the inside information of how the pollies are trying to spin it to win it. Join our panel of experts, insiders and me, your election guide, Will Anthony Green.
Gruen Nation, Wednesday, May 11 on ABC TV and ABC iView. Spoken by Will Anderson and the voiceover guy who has to do this bit as fast as possible.
Hello, I'm Manning Sigas with the top stories on ABC News. The Prime Minister is trying to manage expectations ahead of tomorrow's interest rates decision, saying any change would not be a judgment on his government's economic management. The Reserve Bank is tipped to lift the official cash rate, which would make it the first rate rise during an election campaign in 15 years. Dozens have been evacuated from a besieged steel plant in the Ukrainian city of Mariupol. They had to be helped out after hiding in the vast network of tunnels and underground bunkers for more than 60 days. Hundreds more remain trapped. It's the last part of the city controlled by Ukrainian fighters, who are making a desperate final stand. Qantas has announced it will operate non-stop flights from Australia's east coast to New York and London by the end of 2025. The long-haul flights will initially operate out of Sydney, with the airline ordering 12 new Airbus A350s. The new routes will be the longest passenger flights in the world and are expected to take more than 19 hours. And Muslims are marking the end of the holy month of Ramadan. Crowds have gathered across the country for Eid celebrations for the first time since the pandemic. And those are the latest stories. I'm Manny Tsigas. Bye for now.
Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Ellen Fanning. Coming up, Labor unveils its policy platform with plans to tackle housing affordability and close the gender pay gap. Things get personal between the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, and the Teal Independent looking to unseat him. And 20 hours in a tin can, Qantas to run non-stop flights from Sydney to London and Sydney to New York. Joining me on the panel for just an hour, I promise, former New South Wales Nationals MP Katrina Hodgkinson. Great to see you.
Hi, Ellen.
In Canberra, busy day today, political editor at news.com.au, Samantha Maiden. Great to see you, Sam.
Thanks for having me.
In Hobart, former Labor Senator Doug Cameron. G'day, Doug.
Hi, everyone.
And in Perth, where all the political action was on the weekend, graduate lawyer and founder of Modest Fashion Australia, Aisha Novakovic. Good to see you, Aisha.
Hi, everyone. This is the place to be, WA.
And you can join us from wherever you are on Twitter using the hashtag The Drum, and we're on Facebook. Well, we're halfway through the election campaign, woohoo, and that means we're getting to the business end of the policy announcements. Yesterday, Labor officially launched its campaign in Perth, pledging to address the cost of housing and medicines, to increase manufacturing and to improve electric vehicle infrastructure. Labor also promised to tackle the gender pay gap by strengthening the Fair Work Commission's powers to order pay increases for workers in low-paid, female-dominated industries.
Today I announce that Labor will make gender pay equity an objective of the Fair Work Act. We will set up expert panels on pay equity and the care and community sector to help improve pay and conditions for women in those sectors.
It's a message they've been pushing hard today as well.
It's simply not good enough when women are paid more than $250 a week less than men. To be able to act on this, to be able to deliver for those heroes of the pandemic, there are two things you need to do. You need to fix the structure of the legislation, and then you need to have the panels to implement the improvements.
Meanwhile, the Coalition has pledged $70 million to give an extra 50,000 older Australians access to the Commonwealth Seniors Health Card.
50,000 additional Australians aged 67 and above, people who've saved for their retirement, who don't ask for much, but as they move into their seniors' years and they have to access more and more medications, this makes a difference to their cost of living. You know, there's not a lot we can do about things that are happening overseas that are impacting on our economy. But these practical things that we're doing as a government makes those cost of living pressures just that bit more able to be dealt with.
And that's a promise Labor now says it will match. Let's start with you, Doug Cameron, and we'll start with the vibe of the Labor launch, if you like. Some interesting lines from Mr Albanese in his address. The PM, he said, is all smirk and mirrors.
Well, he nailed it there, didn't he? You know, this is a Prime Minister who has run out of time, he's run out of ideas, and he certainly... you know, he said today, you don't want Anthony Albanese sitting at your dinner table. Well, I can tell this guy, nobody wants him sitting at their dinner table. They want rid of him, and they want rid of him quick.
And what did you think Labor was trying to do with its campaign launch? What was the strategy you saw there?
Well, I saw the strategy which was consistent with what we saw in the first debate, where Labor focused on the issues that are important to, you know, people out there in the community. The reason that Albo won the debate was that the issues that people were raising were issues that Labor is determined to deal with, issues that affect the hip pocket, the living standards in the society that we live in. And that's what's been done with the issues that's been raised at the launch. And I think it's a consistent position that's been brought up. It's a good position. It's about, you know, stopping all this nonsense about a strong economy when the debt's going through the roof. It's about saying we will do practical things to help the community, to help families, and to help working people. That's why it's so well received.
Ashley, can I turn to you? The Labor launch is in your hometown in Perth. Were your impressions of Albanese altered by his speech in any way?
I have to be honest, I felt like his performance was quite compelling. Now, I've spoken to a lot of people in my social circles around who they'd like to vote for, and many have said that they can't stand Scott Morrison, but do they find Albo prime ministerial enough? And I felt like he demonstrated that actually there is some hope for the future. And so I was personally quite impressed, not just by the substantive policies on offer, but also by his presence. And I think there was a lot of great endorsements there yesterday. So I think that he's actually got a strong chance.
Did that surprise you that you were impressed? Were you, because you went into it with those same reservations you've told us that your friends have?
Absolutely. I was very sceptical, and I think, like most people, has suffered from an erosion of trust in our major political parties, even though I traditionally vote that way. However, the way our electoral system is structured is that it really is only going to be one of our major political parties that ever really forms government. So we only really have two choices. A lot of people have told me that they're hoping for a hung parliament where the independents will actually hold the balance of power and be able to leverage their power to negotiate. However, my question is, are we willing to take that risk?
Katrina Hodgkinson, can I turn to you? It's always a tough thing for the opposite party to know what to do on the day of their opponent's launch. The PM announced an anti-trolling bill. There was a rally at Olympic Park, which was a little overshadowed in the media reporting, certainly with the rushed exit of the Warringah candidate, Catherine Deeves, flanked by security. And he went and talked about mental health at a Sydney community centre.
Well, what are you going to do? I mean, campaign launches are always really razzle-dazzle. It's hard to get the media on top of them, so you just keep yourself busy. It's a bit like, you know, in any election campaign, I think if the opposite side's going to be doing something, you know, a big one-hit wonder like a big campaign launch, you just keep yourself busy and just make sure you do those functions that you need to do, see the people you need to see, and move on to the next day. You know, get on top of the papers and try to work out what policy blunders the other side's actually made during that campaign launch. But just in response to Aisha, I think there could be nothing worse than a hung parliament. We need clarity one way or another, either Labor or Liberal, whichever way, coalition or Labor. To have a hung parliament, I was a staff member back a long time ago when Brian Harradine held the balance of power. Now, as a staff member, I was in the Senate, you know, 17 and a half hours a day on a sitting day, easy. It was so hard. Every piece of legislation had to go through the independent.
That's the Senate, though. Nothing changes in the Senate. We're talking about the House of Reps.
Yeah. True. But I just remember that everything had to go through this particular process, through this independent, and it was really what you promised in the lead up to the election might not be what you're able to deliver after the election.
Because sounds like a
it
politician,
goes through, because it has to go through these independents. Very, very challenging indeed.
Okay.
Whereas at least if you know what the policies are that each major political party is announcing, you know what you're going to get if one of them gains the majority after the election.
Sam Maiden, there's a bit of a pattern developing, much stronger themes, I think, for this election, with cost of living and the prospect of an interest rate rise tomorrow, housing, and Labor getting into this pattern of saying anything you can do, we can do better. First on the pharmaceuticals, saying, yep, we'll cut the cost of a PBS item, but we'll cut it more than the coalition. And then again on the pensioner discount card today.
Yeah, look, first of all, I just have to say, just to pick myself up off the floor quickly, governments very rarely control the Senate. That's why it's called the House of Review. And, you know, that's democracy. You have to negotiate bills. Obviously, it was in the House of Reps, it'd be a different situation. In terms of the government actually trying to put up these policy ideas and Labor outbidding them, you're absolutely correct. That has happened, as you mentioned, in relation to the pharmaceutical benefits scheme. So the Prime Minister, remember they had that mess after the budget where they announced in the budget speeches they were going to do something with PBS. Yes. Then they retracted it and then they re-announced it.
Yes.
Shiny and new. But now Labor has outgunned them. So the coalition was going to drop the price of PBS medicines by $10. They're going $12.50. So they're going to outgun them on that. I think the real issue that's going to emerge as the issue of the week is, as you hinted at, interest rates. If indeed the RBA moves this week, it'll be the first time that interest rates have gone up since November 2010, and they have been steady or going down ever since. So there's a whole generation of homeowners that aren't used to the idea that your mortgage monthly or fortnightly, whatever you pay, goes up and up and up. And it will also be the first time it's happened in an election campaign since 2007 when Kevin Rudd was elected. So there's a lot of people that are thinking, a lot of pollsters that I've spoken to who are saying there's a real risk if interest rates go up that the tide will really go out on Scott Morrison's hopes of staging a second miracle election victory.
And let's break down some of the things. Yes, indeed, Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, can I just say, does anyone think that the interest rates won't go up? I mean, the Reserve Bank has got a mandate, and if it meets the mandate, the interest rates will rise. And, you know, that's not something that anyone should be happy about in the context of, living standards, but that's, I think, going to be a reality.
We'll know tomorrow.
The point that I was trying to make, though, was that this is a political problem for Scott Morrison. He's running on the idea of economic management. Obviously, everybody knows that interest rates are likely to go up. The politics of it are difficult for the RBA because such inflation is running at such a rate that if they, there was an expectation they might move at the beginning of the campaign. If they don't move again, it'll look political in a different way.
Sam, I mean, inextricably linked with rising cost of living and rising mortgages is the fact that wages aren't keeping up. And this is a key plank of what Labor's talking about and was talking about at that launch yesterday. Specifically, taking action to improve the wages of female-dominated industries where we see several cases at the moment asking the Fair Work Commission to acknowledge the value of that work. What exactly would Labor do to try and set a fire underneath these industries' wages, aged care, childcare, nursing, teaching, all the rest of it?
Well, the specific mechanism that they announced on Sunday was that they would enshrine pay equity in the Fair Work Act, and that they would also put in place some research capability to basically drive and some expert panels to drive increases in pay in female-dominated industries. So the concern has always been if you work in aged care, if you work in the disability sector, if you work in childcare, that your awards are not on a par with other male-dominated industries. Why not? They would argue because it's female-dominated. There will always be a big debate about gender pay. You'll always get people sort of saying, oh, well, this is silly. There's no male pay rates and female pay rates. But the numbers don't lie. Women do tend to earn less. And even though it wasn't something that they announced yesterday, one of the things that I think is going to be really fascinating if it's implemented is this requirement that they've previously announced that companies larger than 250 people have to actually publish a comparison of wages between blokes and Sheilas doing the same job. And I think some of the information that would yield would be quite bracing.
That's a very nice turn of phrase, don't you think?
Not that I'm suggesting that I need a pay rise too.
Quite bracing. Housing affordability has become one of those grim topics because we all know record property prices have made home ownership pretty much impossible for many Australians. But with cost of living worries front and centre this election, both parties are offering a glimmer of hope to those currently priced out of the market. One of the key planks of Labor's campaign launch was a promise to help 10,000 low and middle income earners buy their own home each year by having the government actually own a share of the house they buy, saving the homeowner up to $380,000 on the mortgage. With the Coalition also working on ways to get more Australians into their own home, the Drum's David Taylor has been looking at how both major parties are planning to make the process of home ownership less painful.
Many Australians have given up on owning their own home. But it seems both major parties have not given up.
Parents I speak to say they don't think their kids will ever have the opportunity of home ownership that my generation had our parents encourage us to do. We can do better than this.
Labor used its official party launch on Sunday to pitch its vision for new home ownership for those on low and middle incomes. It's going to help a group of Australians into home ownership by taking an up to 40% stake in a new property and up to 30% stake of an existing home, significantly reducing the new home buyer's monthly repayments. It's called the Help to Buy scheme. To buy a property, you'll need to be living at home or renting, stump up a 2% deposit and earn $90,000 a year or less for singles and $120,000 for couples. 10,000 properties are available across the capital cities and another 10,000 for the regional first home buyer scheme.
I mean, what Labor have been very clear about is they have a share in your home, and so as your home value increases, they're making money off you. So as your home price goes up, your home value goes up, they are taking a cut.
Any housing market policy that makes it easier for people to borrow more money or to bid more at an auction is a support for housing prices. However, no matter which housing policy we look at, when it comes to those first home buyer policies that are in discussion right now, none of them are big enough to have a huge impact on the housing market.
The government's called its housing policy the Home Guarantee Scheme. First home buyers will need to stump up a 5% deposit and 2% for single parents. Individuals can earn up to $120,000, while the income cap is $200,000 for couples. There are 50,000 places available. First home buyers, single parents and people moving to regional areas, all eligible. Labor backs the scheme as well. But a crucial difference is that you'll be working towards paying off the cost of the whole mortgage every month, as opposed to a proportion of the mortgage under Labor.
Let's take a look at this from a practical level though, because there are a lot of numbers and figures being thrown around. Under a coalition government, for a $900,000 home, you're looking at stumping up $45,000 deposit. Under Labor, it's around about $12,600 deposit. The other key difference is that when you're all done and dusted and the mortgage is paid off and you own the home, when you sell it under the coalition government, you'll take everything. Under Labor government, depending on how much you've paid off, you'll take a portion of the proceeds.
But one crucial factor holds true. Because Labor is backing the coalition's plan too, either way, deposits are about to get smaller for those who struggle to build them the most.
Good summary there from David Taylor. All right, Aisha, let's look at the Labor policy, pretty much designed for people like you. You're a single mum, 2 boys, you recently finished a law degree. That sounds expensive.
Yeah, $100,000 HECS debt.
Would you share home ownership, the ownership of a home for you and your kids to live in, with the federal government?
Yes, I would, actually. And I really like this strategy and this scheme. It reminds me of a model that was introduced through the Islamic banking system here in Australia. So about 20 years ago, it was called a rent to own, where you would go in partnership with the Islamic bank or cooperative, and it was literally operating on very similar principles. So with having the government partly owning the property, and a 2% deposit is minuscule, I think it really reduces the barriers to entry in the property market, because I, like many others, just sort of gave up and said, well, unless I work probably for another 10, 15 years, become really financially stable in my career as a criminal lawyer, etc. And meanwhile, the cost of living is going up and the property prices are going up. And there's no security. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's your shelter and accommodation is just a basic human need. And it's what allows people in our society to go from surviving to striving to thriving. And if there's a whole generation that's facing the impossibility of entering the property market, then I feel that's going to really create a lot of stresses, a lot of social conditions which are really unfortunate. That's not the kind of country or the future that I want for my own children.
And I guess the reason that it's reminding you of a Sharia scheme is because an Islamic bank wouldn't charge interest. And under this proposal, the federal government would have a 30 or 40% stake. You would, at 30% if it's an existing home, 40% if it's a new home. You'd have the rest, but you wouldn't be paying rent to the government, and you wouldn't have to pay any interest to the government for their share of it. You just borrow the remaining amount of the mortgage, you pay that off, and over time you can buy increasing amounts of your house at market rates, if it increases, from the government. So that has appeal for you.
Absolutely, it's very Sharia compliant, and I mean that might make a few people in the audience panic, like the halal debate. But you know, you're not going to convert to Islam just because you go into partnership with the government for a property. No, but I think that it could really open up the floodgates, and I know there are only going to be 10,000 spots available, but I think that's reasonable. Nail it and then scale it. Trial it out. But for me, I think it's really exciting. I think it's actually quite genius. And if they get this right, I think the consequences could be very far-reaching and really, it could be a game changer. That's basically what I think.
And it wouldn't worry you, as Mr Morrison said, at the end, say in 10 years' time you wanted to sell that property, that you would only take 60-70% of the capital gain, and the federal government would take 30-40% 30 to 40% of the
Yes,
capital gain
it
because they
wouldn't
own
bother
that
me.
chunk. That wouldn't worry you.
No. Well, think about this. Do you want to do deals with a bank, which hasn't really got your interests at heart? They're there to take care of themselves. Or would you like to go in partnership with the government? You may not trust them fully. However, they're generating revenue to put back into the community. To me, I think that's a risk I'm willing to take. I'd rather do deals with that devil than the other one.
Okay. Katrina Hodgkinson, you're a member of the National Party. You've heard what the Prime Minister's had to say about this. He says Australians don't want Anthony Albanese at the kitchen table as a co-owner of their home. Your view?
Look, I think this is creative policy, actually. I think that both packages are really good. I think the Coalition's housing strategy is fabulous, includes regional Australia, which is really important. But I think that this is creative thinking on behalf of the opposition. And I think that we need to have that creative thinking and give it a go. You know, credit where credit's due. Sure, it's only 10,000. That's going to probably be, you know, if they're successful at the election, quite competitive to get into. So it'll be interesting to see how they end up selecting that 10,000, particularly if it's oversubscribed. There might be some sort of ballot system, I guess. But I think that, you know, it's credit to both sides that they've really taken a strong interest in making, you know, a really good go at getting people into the housing market. Where the problem lies, of course, very strongly also is with the rental market and people who can't afford or haven't, you know, not quite got that means to buy a house. What are they going to be doing in the rental market in the meantime? Because rents are just escalating through the roof and more people are finding it very, very difficult to find accommodation, particularly in the coastal areas.
Doug Cameron, the only critique I've seen of this so far, and I'm sure more will come out, other than from the Prime Minister, who's got some concerns about, OK, well, what if I renovate the bathroom? What if I renovate the kitchen? How does that work? And presumably, I don't know is the answer to that question, but presumably it would work like capital gain, that you take the cost base and you figure it out from there. But the only criticism seems to be there'll be too many people interested in the scheme. I did some sums. Brisbane, I mean, it's for people on middle to low incomes, low to middle incomes, and there's a cap on the value of the house that you can buy, and that cap in Brisbane is $650,000. So you could buy a house in Inala, 3 beds, 1 bath, big rumpus room and an outdoor area for that money. So if you think about how much the buyer would have to stump up for that, as opposed to the government, they'd need a loan of $442,000. The federal government would take care of the rest. So their repayments would be $387 a week today. Might be more tomorrow when the Reserve Bank increases rates, but let's say $387, call it $400. That, Doug, is pretty much the same cost to rent that exact same house in that exact suburb. So, I mean, this makes a lot of sense for a lot of people, but it's restricted to 10,000.
Yeah. Well, it's restricted to 10,000 because Labor, I think, is trying this out. I think in future this will be a terrific policy. And remember, Labor has not only got this policy on housing, they've got their social housing policy, their Indigenous housing policy, they've got policy for, women in violent family situations. So Labor have got a rounded policy.
And can I add, Doug, just for clarity, that they have the Coalition's policy as well. They're going to replicate that in government if they won, that home guarantee scheme, where you have a less deposit, 5% for first home buyers, 2% for single parents, right? But then you've got to meet the rest of the mortgage. You've got to pay off all of the mortgage, whereas under this Labor scheme, which is separate, but Labor would do that as well.
Yeah, Albo said if there's decent ideas out there, he'll certainly look at them, and he's done that here. I think this is such a good policy that you saw this, tsunami of verbal diarrhea from Morrison today, attacking the policy, trying to downplay the policy, and trying to put a fear campaign in place that Albo would be sitting at your dinner table, that you couldn't put a photograph up on your wall. What a load of fear-mongering nonsense from this panicked Prime Minister. This is a good policy. We need to be innovative. We need to look at how we can do this. And, Morrison and his fear campaigns and his lies just don't cut it anymore. Just don't cut it.
Sam, 10,000 people into their own home represents a boost of about 10% of the number of first homeowners who get into the market each year. That's just to give you some sense of it. This scheme wouldn't be restricted to first homeowners, but it would boost by about 10% the number of first homeowners getting in. How hard is this going to be for Scott Morrison to raise concerns about this policy?
Well, it's going to be more difficult because what's surfaced in the last hour is this video of Scott Morrison in 2008 actually spruiking the idea of shared equity schemes. Now, this was in relation to the global financial crisis. His office is putting out tonight the point that, he was talking about banks, but he's on tape saying shared equity schemes are wonderful, and now he's saying today that they're terrible, and Anthony Albanese is going to be sitting at your dinner table asking for a sausage and mash. Now, I think that there's a couple of things to say about the limits on it. Obviously, 10,000 places means that they don't want it to have an inflationary effect on the market, and that's something that some people are worried about.
They don't want it to push up house prices.
Yeah, that's right. But, in relation to what happens if you do a reno, they've got schemes like this already around the country that the states are running, right? So the WA does it, Victoria does it. What they do is they say that if you've done a renovation, they bring in a special kind of valuer when you sell it to take into consideration that. So the government is not going to get 40% of you doing a $200,000 reno, for example. There are some questions and concerns I think it raises in relation to what happens if people get divorced, what happens if people have to move into state. There is provision in the state schemes to, in special circumstances, allow people to rent it out if they absolutely need to. So a lot of these problems, and there are genuine questions and queries about it, to some extent have been answered by the way that the scheme has worked interstate. But I think that there's going to be a great deal of interest in it because for a lot of people, they just can't afford, the cap is something like 900,000 in Sydney and say it's 650 or something thereabouts in Queensland. They can't afford a mortgage of that magnitude. So obviously if they were able to take out a mortgage for 400,000, that's more doable. And I don't think that many people are going to quibble about the government having that share. Obviously, over time, once you've paid off the first section of your mortgage, you can buy out the government as well.
At the same time, Katrina, this does nothing to control, and none of these policies do anything much to control the ever-rising price of houses. That doesn't do anything about negative gearing, about capital gains tax discounts, about Airbnb. It doesn't do anything about any of it.
And Airbnb is just one of those things, isn't it? It's part of the problem, I think, that people have been buying investment properties that might have been used for rental purposes previously and then converted to short stay.
And this comes back to your point about the lack of rentals in the regions.
Lack of rent, particularly in the coastal areas, the really popular tourist areas, because of course if you've got an investment property and you can get $600 for 2 nights, why would you rent it out for 2 weeks for $600? And it's a really perplexing and challenging issue. I think if there was a quick fix that either side would have thought of it by now, so I'm not pretending that it's an easy one to solve, but it's one that we do have to solve because there are families that are really struggling at the moment, particularly in those coastal areas, trying to find somewhere to live and, really at their wits' end, particularly families. And that's, I think, really worthy of government attention and support.
Doug,
Ellen,
yeah,
these problems have been fixed before. After the Second World War, there was a desperate need for housing. And all over the world, governments intervened. They didn't leave it to the market to try and fix the problem. And this is the problem with the Morrison government. They think the market can fix everything. This is a huge market failure in housing. And government, just can't sit back and say, I don't hold a hose. It's the state governments that have got to fix this. Governments, federal governments have to say this is a national problem. We're going to deal with it. We're going to inject ourselves into this to put a roof over people's heads. And in the UK, one of the initiatives that they've taken now is to do modular housing. Not old prefabricated housing, but modular housing that is highly engineered, that is environmentally sustainable, reduces cost to run, can get out there, less labour to install, and that's something that Labour can do through its manufacturing initiative in association with their housing policies to get a manufactured housing industry in this country, reduce the cost of build, reduce the cost of assembly, and get more people into housing.
At the same time,
states might have something to say about that. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I'm just wanting to ask Sam.
Yeah, they'd love it. The states would love it if somebody took some leadership.
I just want to challenge the notion that the coalition is saying they don't hold a hose on this. They've got a home guarantee scheme, and as David's piece said at the end there, Sam, we've basically got to a position where tens of thousands of Australians under a coalition or Labor government will be paying a fraction of the deposit that they would have paid in years past.
And they're now worried about how they're going to keep the payments up.
All right, well, let's hear Sam on that.
I love hearing from Doug. But look, I think that the same criticisms were made of the coalition scheme when they were first announced, of people being concerned that it would push prices up. And they made the point that they had, less places. There's a cap on the number of places. The bottom line is that these schemes are very popular for one simple reason, that the ability of people on normal incomes, lower middle incomes, to actually own a house has been dramatically reduced in recent decades. And that is, some people are fine with that, but I think most people think that that is not a good thing. Most parents want their children to be able to have the security of their own home. There is a lot of evidence, particularly that women, older women, particularly divorced women, are in many cases ending up homeless, when they are retired, because they don't have a roof over their head. Everybody knows that the pension is really not doable unless you own your own apartment or your own flat or your own home. Very hard to use the pension to pay the rent. So I think that anything that helps people get into the market in a safe way and a managed way is a good thing.
Real quick, Aisha, just a final point. I wonder whether or not, do you think this is right, that this reflects this shift in our perceptions of home ownership in Australia? We don't necessarily want to own the house outright. We just want to own the house with a mortgage, whether that's an older person who's not going to stay in the workforce long enough to pay it off and the bank won't lend to them, or somebody in your position. The dream is just not to be tossed out every 12 months by the landlord. Would that be right?
I think my generation and younger have just come to terms with what's required to live in this country. And I think that this new scheme offers a glimmer of hope. I mean, otherwise we could all just move to Bali, I suppose, and live the life of queens, buy a beautiful villa for about 10 grand and have lots of massages on a weekly basis.
It sounds like you've got an Excel spreadsheet for this somewhere.
I have a plan B. If this scheme doesn't go through, then I might be exploring overseas options. But you know what? There are lots of people who, actually there was a study that was recently done about, what was it called? The Great Australian Relocation, that a lot of Australians have just given up and thought, there are greener pastures overseas. And when Doug was talking about the model in the UK, in actual fact, there are lots of international examples of better communal housing that can be done in a more sustainable way. If we're meant to be an innovative country, then we need to start listening and taking up the lessons. So I'm excited. I'd like to watch this space and see what happens post-election.
You're watching the drum, and with me on the
Ellen,
panel.
just very quickly, there's one area we haven't touched on, only briefly, and that is homelessness.
Yes.
There are about 120,000 people homeless tonight, and we need to look at public housing, social housing, and home ownership as part of an overall package, not as the government has said that that's a state government issue and walk away when there's money there to do these things at the federal level.
Absolutely.
Bigger discussion about a joined-up housing policy.
Yeah.
About a federal housing department, a cabinet minister for housing, goodness knows. The drum, and with me on the panel are former New South Wales Nationals MP Katrina Hodgkinson, in Canberra political editor at news.com.au Samantha Maiden, in Hobart former Labor Senator Doug Cameron, and in Perth graduate lawyer and founder of Modest Fashion Australia, Aisha Novakovic. There's less than 3 weeks until election day, and the coalition has seen another drop in the polls, with support falling to 33% from 35% in the latest Sydney Morning Herald poll. Labor's support is holding steady at 34%, but the rising popularity of the Teal independents could throw a spanner in the works for any future government. We know, for instance, that a number of moderate coalition MPs are facing serious challenges from these independents. The most high-profile of these is the Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, who's battling it out against independent Dr Monique Ryan to hold on to the traditional blue ribbon seat of Kooyong. The electorate is awash with billboards, with both candidates spending big on the ground. Yesterday, the Treasurer used his official campaign launch to question the legitimacy of what he's dubbed the so-called independents.
Now, if you think that Australia can take the big decisions on the economy with a hung parliament, you are wrong. Because a hung parliament will bring chaos and confusion. I'm not up against a true independent. I'm up against a political party. You can barely find a Greens or a Labor sign across our electorate. Why? Because they're running dead and they're now in bed with these so-called independents.
How worried is Josh Frydenberg, Sam, mate?
I think he's worried, but I'm a bit dubious of the idea that they're necessarily going to pick up Kooyong. Like, I think he's absolutely been given a run for his money and, you know, he's not necessarily liking it, but it sort of has the whiff to me of, remember when Christopher Pyne ran for the Deputy Liberal leader and told people just to vote for him because he just wanted to, he was, you know, going to be so embarrassed if no one voted for him, and then he nearly won. I think there's a bit of, you know, perhaps Josh over exaggerating how much trouble he's in to try and ensure that he's okay. But there's no doubt that they're proving a huge problem for the Liberal Party because they have to run all these marginal seat campaigns in seats that were previously blue ribbon safe seats, right? So it bounces around a little bit which seats they say that are in trouble, but they often say that they're really worried about Dave Sharma in Wentworth. They're really worried about Trent Zimmerman in North Sydney. And of course, there's a bit of concern, it depends on who you talk to, about Tim Wilson and Goldstein, who's up against a former ABC journalist. Can you believe it?
And how much would funding be diverted out of Tim Wilson's seat into the Treasurer's seat to try and sandbag that? I mean, are they sort of starving Gladys Liu and Tim Wilson in order to prop up the Treasurer?
Oh, I don't think so, because Josh Frydenberg has always been such a fundraiser. Remember, he has that Kooyong Club. He's always raising so much money that he's farming it out to others. This time around, he might be hanging on to a bit extra. But no, they definitely wouldn't be cutting anyone else's lunch. Josh would just be calling in favours to the front and centre to make sure that his face is plastered over every empty bank and every empty shopping centre in Kooyong.
And how many...
Ellen, can I just say that... you know, a vote for Josh Frydenberg is a vote for Barnaby Joyce and Matt Canavan.
You sound like you got a teal T-shirt on underneath that.
No, he does have a teal shirt on.
I've always got a Labour shirt on. But, you know, that's the reality of this. You know, people look around and they look at Josh and they go, what were you doing when these guys were killing decent environmental policy? What were you doing when they were demanding huge bribes to, you know, to give this non-committal on climate change?
Hang on.
I think Josh could be in a lot of trouble.
I think you're talking about electoral bribes there, aren't you?
Be careful.
Yeah, I was going to say bribes. Goodness gracious me.
The ministers in the National Party are very focused on
bribe.
regional Australia and have been doing a lot for regional Australia. So, you know, that's where their focus is. And, you know, it all counts. There's so many jobs. There's, you know, families in regional Australia, Doug. You know, we rely on, you know...
To the substantial point that Doug's making, though, Katrina, are these inner-city Liberals paying a price for the position of National Party identities like Barnaby Joyce, like Matt Canavan, who have been reluctant to see really strong action on climate change, action on a Federal Integrity Commission and so on? Well,
let me tell you, when you're working in regional Australia and there's very few jobs around, you take what you can. And if you're supporting your family, you want to get a meal on the table at night, you want to be paying your mortgage, then you will take what you can get and you will defend that to the end. And that's how I see that certain members, particularly in Queensland, have been responding to the situation. Now, the independents, they've got a couple of slogans. One of them, I think, is Climate 200. I think that they stand for one other thing as well. Can't quite put my finger on it at the moment.
Federal ICAC is always the one.
Yeah, that's the one. Thank you.
They want to
Thank
look
you.
into bribes.
It's the ICAC. They're the two things. So this, and Josh is calling it basically an independent party. We know Simon Holmes à Court is almost like a campaign director for these 11 or so independents. It does feel like a political party which is focused on a very much a Greens-based agenda. That's how it comes across.
So you share his criticism of these independents, that they're not true independents, each of them?
I think that each one of them that I know of is articulate, is intelligent, is, you know, very media savvy, and obviously of great characteristics independently, but together they are coming across as a political party with one or two key focuses. I don't know what their views are on the economy. I don't know what their views are on everything else that the other political parties are actually standing for and putting out great policies on, both sides. But where are these independents? And when you go into that ballot box on Saturday the 21st of May, and you look at those independents versus the other candidates in the ring, who will be making sure that you can provide for your family, that you can pay your rent, that you can make sure that the jobs in your community are going to continue to be there in 6 months, 12 months, 2 years' time? That's what you want to be basing your vote on, not on some
not Barnaby
emotive...
Joyce.
But Ellen, I think we're missing...
Barnaby has done a fantastic job for regional Australia, and if he wasn't
He's
there,
done
then
what?
regional... He has done a fantastic job for regional Australia.
He has ran scare campaigns.
You should know that.
All of his political life
we're trying to
is
talk
a
about
disgrace.
the independents rather than Barnaby Joyce. Sam Maiden?
Well, what I was going to say is I think that the point we're missing a little bit is twofold. One is, what the heck has happened to the Liberal Party that all of their traditional rusted-on voters are sick of it, they're over it, and they're looking for an alternative in an aquamarine T-shirt, right? There's something going wrong in terms of, or there's just a change in this idea that the Liberal Party's future lies in working class voters in outer suburban areas rather than educated voters in inner city areas. I think that, you know, that's one issue. But the more fascinating thing to me, in terms of the battle for the heart and soul of the Liberal Party, if they lose, is that if you talk to people on Josh Frydenberg's campaign, they're not saying that Barnaby Joyce is hurting them. They're saying that the person who's hurting them, the brand that is toxic in Kooyong, is the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. And that has a lot of fascinating implications for what happens with the leadership of the Liberal Party after the election.
I thought it was interesting that Mike Baird, the former New South Wales Premier, Aisha, was saying, rather than reacting angrily to the challenge from independents, he challenged the Liberal Party to reflect and see how well they've done for community. And I was also interested to read Allegra Spender said, if moderates had really stood up on these key issues, if they had made the difference, she said, I would not be standing. Now, I'm assuming you're unlikely to vote for a Teal candidate, but can you see the appeal of them?
Absolutely. I think what's been happening is that there has been a widespread depreciation on the morality and integrity of leadership at a federal level, and this, I think, these independents, it does seem like a very cleverly coordinated and strategic movement. I'm not sure I would say it feels like a party. I mean, I understand the spirit of that statement, but it does feel like a coordinated attack as such, to be very disruptive of establishment politics that many citizens in this country rightly are very angry about and have lost their trust and faith in that establishment to actually take care of our needs, our very basic needs. And so I think in this current political climate, the independents have been able to cleverly position themselves to exploit that frustration and potentially do a lot of damage to the Liberal Party. So if I were a member of the Liberal Party, I'd also feel a little unnerved as well, because they seem to be well-funded, well organised and hitting at the heart of many key issues, including those around climate change. I have spoken to people who have said that they're traditionally big party voters, say Labor or Liberal, but they are definitely going to vote for the independents.
Okay, Doug, when I think it was Frydenberg said, if you vote for a so-called independent, you'll get Anthony Albanese in the Labor Party. Do you believe that's true?
Well, look, Josh is panicked. There's no doubt about that. And I think I've known Anthony Albanese for over 30 years. I'm a friend of his. I've worked with him closely. And if you get Anthony Albanese, what you're getting is someone who understands working people,
my question very simply is, does the Labor Party, when it's trying to make the numbers add up to a majority in the House of Representatives, say, great, we get a Legra spender, we get some of these other teal independents, and that's a number in our column. Is that part of Labor's mindset?
I think Morrison is so much on the nose that I don't think it will be a hung parliament.
Okay, you've sidestepped that a couple of times, so I'll go and ask Sam Maiden the same thing. We hear a lot of harping on about this balance of power issue, which is really a hypothetical on a hypothetical on a hypothetical. First you've got to win the seat, then you've got to have a hung parliament, and then the Teals would have to make decisions about who to back. What are your thoughts on that? Are we overplaying that, or is that a genuine thing we should be looking hard at? Who would you back in a hung parliament?
I think it depends on the independent you ask. So, for example, Rebecca Sharkey has made it clear that she would be more likely to vote with the Libs. I think that when the Labor Party early on in this campaign started getting worried that Anthony Albanese was a bit of wobbly, he was making unforced errors, and they were worried that they might end up in a minority government situation, you know, they can count on the vote, for example. Now, Doug, I love hearing from you, but I'm going to ask you... I'm going to ask you to allow me to finish one answer without you interrupting.
I'm sorry, I apologise, but I couldn't help it.
I think it was more heckling than
so I'm going to ask you to let me finish one answer without you interjecting. So basically what I was trying to... Okay, can I finish my answer? I'm serious, because he keeps interrupting me.
Indeed, Sam. You go.
Okay, so what I wanted to say was that it depends on the independent you ask. Some, I think, are saying that they would go with the coalition. Some, there are suspicions that they would go with the Labor Party. But the one thing that you can always guarantee is if you're a woman on this program, you won't be able to speak over Doug Cameron mansplaining you, interjecting and not allowing you to finish your point, because he thinks what he has to say is more important than everybody else.
Well, I'd like you to answer this next question.
Samantha.
I'd like you to answer this last question, Sam, and that is the preferences. The Greens have indicated they'll preference Labor around the country. One Nation's making some interesting decisions, particularly in Queensland, that they'll preference the LNP in Queensland ahead of Labor. How much harder does that make it for Labor to win seats in Queensland? Just briefly.
Oh, well, it doesn't make it easier, but and it could be important. I think that the interesting thing was also what they were doing around the rest of the country in relation to that fight that they're having with Jackie Lambie, right? So, I mean, obviously they're looking for whatever preferences deals that they can get. So, no, of course, it's not going to make it easier for Labor, but I think that there is a real expectation that Labor will, at this point, get over the line and form majority government on the basis of the polls to date.
Thank you, Sam Maiden. Qantas passengers are officially in for the long haul, with the world's longest passenger flight set to launch in 2025. The flight includes a 20-hour non-stop flight from Sydney to London and another one to New York.
We were 2 weeks away from ordering the aircraft back in 2020. 2 weeks away from it. Unfortunately, COVID has meant we've lost 2 years because it was not appropriate for us to do that while that was going on. It will be an amazing achievement for aviation, and it'll be an amazing achievement that I think our founders will be proud of.
As we've heard, Project Sunrise has been in the works for some time, with test flights running in late 2019 to see what 20 hours on a plane would do to a passenger and a flight crew. The test flight saw no more than 40 passengers experience the non-stop flight in business class, with tailored meals and a strict sleep schedule to minimise jet lag, while pilots were tested on melatonin and alertness levels. We spoke to 2 travel bloggers who took that flight to find out if they'd recovered yet.
It was a tremendously long flight. It was a very interesting experience because it was sort of done as a research flight. It was a little bit of a publicity stunt for Qantas.
Jess, my wife, was actually 4 months pregnant at the time. You know, we just saw this opportunity to just go straight to the UK.
There's an important caveat, which is that we were mostly all seated in business class, so that obviously helped. We were able to turn our seats into beds and get some proper sleep lying down.
I just slept for more than 8 hours, which was the best I've ever slept on a plane.
Yeah, we slept most of the flight, which was amazing. There's a fridge back there with unlimited Tim Tams. I mean, what more could you ask for?
I would absolutely take the nonstop again. It's long, it's a slog, but if you're just diligent about getting up and moving around, you know, you're probably going to be tired on the ground. It might take you a day or so to recover from it, but it was just so much more seamless and effective, I thought, than dealing with that, 2-hour transfer or going through passport control and having to get back on a flight. Seeing the seat map that they've laid out, just seeing that there is some room to stand up and move around, then yeah, I would put up with the, cramped legroom and all of that.
It does on paper sound like, oh, that's a bit much. But personally, by not having that flight broken up in two, we just found it a lot more enjoyable.
Typically on any long haul travel, it's really the transfer that drains you. So, I really thought that the longer flight personally was a better way for me to fly.
Aisha, I want you to imagine doing that, but in economy, on a full plane.
Oh, God, no. I was going to say, no way. I would not be doing that in economy. And not because I'm a princess or anything, but I once did a flight from Perth to Dubai for 11 hours, and I was getting itchy at about the 5-hour mark, and that was an economy. And I'm only used to really flying to Indonesia about 3.5, 4 hours, and then that was really like going to the Middle East. I could not imagine doing the 20 hours, but my more serious question is how do I become part of that test group? Alan Joyce, if you're watching this, I'd like to sign up. If you have any more future trials, I'd like to volunteer.
I worry about the whole DVT thing, getting up and moving around.
That's a real problem, definitely.
It would look like they were doing some sort of Macarena.
But there was nobody on the plane. There were only 40 people and they were all lying down.
Yeah. I like the idea of having no stopovers, I've got to say, I think. But once again, in economy, I don't know. I don't think I'd want to do 20 hours in economy.
Yeah.
Doug, you'd have done some long-haul flights?
Yeah, I've done a fair few long-haul flights. I've actually been lucky enough to do it up the front of the plane, but most of the time...
Surprise, surprise!
I've been down the back.
Colour me
most
shocked!
Of the time, most of the time
he's
I've
a
been
man
down
of the
the
people.
back, right? And, I thought Alan Joyce would need to issue incontinence pants as part of this economy flight, because you wouldn't be able to get out past people that are exhausted lying in that cramped little economy seat. It's look, I like the idea of getting on and going, and that's the end of it, but it would be really tough.
How did we get to adult nappies? I'm not sure.
Doug talking.
Thanks, Doug.
Haven't you been on a Qantas plane when the toilets are clogged up?
It's not pretty.
I have.
This is true.
Oh.
Thanks for sharing.
I'm wondering whether you want to attempt an answer, Sam.
Look, I have never flown anywhere other than economy because that's how down to earth I am. I've never taken a taxpayer flight. I've never sat up the front. I am pristine. And look, I've even travelled overseas with toddlers, so I should get an AO for that, I think. But I will definitely go on a 20-hour flight if I can get somewhere faster without getting on and off and wandering around some airport. Sounds good to me.
Especially with toddlers, definitely.
Yeah. Particularly if Dougie's there with his depend on. What a treat that would be.
Tina.
You would help me out, wouldn't you?
Oh, Lord. I don't think I would, Doug. I think I'd let you look after it yourself.
Aisha, what's interesting to me, though, is that the Qantas share price is going up because despite all this chat we've had about cost of living, about what the Reserve Bank might do tomorrow, there is a confidence in the markets that Australians are going to want to get on a plane, whether it's to stop over in Singapore, Dubai or whatever, or go the whole way. You think that's true?
Yeah, with an extra nappy in the travel kit, ready to go. I think so. I was looking at flights online and they're still quite expensive, but they are looking to, I think, decrease really soon. So I think around mid-May, June, definitely I am ready to travel overseas again. So I'm not surprised that Qantas is bouncing back.
It's a real clue, Katrina, as to what might happen in this economy, right? You got apparently Australia's got $250 billion squirreled away as a result of the pandemic, and the question is, do they continue to spend it, or are they going to pull back as a result of these cost
just
of living
remember,
pressures?
pre-pandemic, Australia is a travelling nation, and they were going everywhere. Then suddenly lockdown, nobody's going anywhere. I think that there are a lot of people out there with very itchy feet, just dying to get back in the air, see relatives, see friends, see places, do things that they haven't been able to do for the last couple of years. And so I think that this is clever of Alan Joyce. I mean, he said in his piece that they were 2 weeks away from it when COVID hit. So they've obviously been waiting for a long time to get this project off the ground. But you know, I think it's clever. I think Qantas has been clever here, and I think it'll be very popular.
Sometimes Qantas are too clever by half, to be honest.
Share price.
I just wish they would, you know, pay their workers properly, stop contracting out, given they're back going well, you know, employ the workers that they sacked. That would be great.
Well, this has been an interesting program. Thank you all very much for coming.
Thanks for
I feel
having
like
us.
I was very well behaved.
You were the best.
Usually I'm the one who's, Anyway.
It's been great. Can I just also say
Briefly.
Eid Mubarak.
Yes.
Happy Eid to everyone, because we've just finished the month of Ramadan. So
Happy Eid,
millions of
Aisha.
Muslims. Today, it's the first day of Eid. Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
very much. What a lovely, gracious note on which to end. Thank you very much to Katrina, to Sam Maiden, to Doug and to Aisha in Perth. Julia is in tomorrow night. Good night to you.
For the latest on the federal election, go to ABC News Digital.
Policy announcements and how they impact you.
Profiles of every electorate, including yours.
Anthony Green's guide to the key seats.
You Ask, We Answer is back, and you can see what other Australians are asking.
There's our new Get Ready to Vote checklist, plus live blogs and notifications so you won't miss a thing.
For election news that matters to you, go to abc.net.au/Australia Votes or download the ABC News app.
The Prime Minister distances himself from the Reserve Bank's impending decision on interest rates, declaring it's not about me. Finally free, about 100 civilians evacuated from the bunkers of Mariupol's besieged steel plant after more than 60 days underground. More money to fix problems in WA's emergency departments, including ambulance ramping.
And coming up on The Business, failing the mortgage stress test, the looming rate rises that could be make or break for hundreds of thousands of new borrowers.
This is ABC Late News. Hello, I'm Pamela Medlin. The Prime Minister is trying to manage expectations ahead of tomorrow's interest rates decision, saying any change would not be a judgment on his government's economic management. The Reserve Bank is tipped to lift the official cash rate, which is at a record low level for the first time since 2010. If that happens, it would be the first rate rise during an election campaign in 15 years. Here's political reporter Melissa Clark.
The economy is made up of many moving parts. With inflation going up, the Reserve Bank will consider its next move tomorrow, with expectations it may raise the cash rate from the record low of 0.1%.
Australians have been insulating themselves over the course of the pandemic to deal with these shocks that they knew would be coming. Sometimes you get lucky.
The Prime Minister is looking for insulation too, saying any hip pocket pain from a rate rise is not a reflection of his government's handling of the economy.
It's not about politics. So tomorrow, it's not about me, it's not about Mr Albanese, it's about Australians themselves.
To despite directly linking economic management and interest rate moves moments earlier.
How we manage the economy, how we manage the government's finances will impact potentially on what happens to rates.
Whether the Reserve Bank raises interest rates this week or next month, Scott Morrison's economic credibility is in tatters.
Labor wants to see wage growth to counter the impact of inflation on cost of living.
Scott Morrison seems to think that people are doing it easy in this country. The truth is they're not.
Where's the best place to get a cup of tea around here?
The Coalition is promising to expand access to the Commonwealth Seniors Card, so an extra 50,000 self-funded retirees benefit from cheaper healthcare and discount medicines.
It'll mean that they will have less anxiety about those healthcare costs. So that will be very welcome.
The pitch was immediately matched by Labor.
Where there's a good idea, we will support it.
In this election campaign, the stakes are as high as the policy contest is narrow. The Coalition wanted a battle on economic management, and Labor has happily adopted the theme, knowing any increase in interest rates, even the prospect of a rate rise, will bite hard in some marginal electorates where this election contest could be won or lost. Melissa Clark, ABC News, Canberra.
The United Nations has confirmed the long-awaited rescue of civilians from Mariupol is underway, with 100 people now evacuated from the city's besieged steel plant. They had to be helped out of the Azovstal steelworks after hiding in the vast network of tunnels and underground bunkers for more than 60 days. Hundreds more are still trapped in the plant. It's the last part of the city controlled by Ukrainian fighters who are making a desperate final stand.
We did not see any sunlight. We were scared. When the shells started landing there, I thought my heart would stop and we wouldn't survive.
Some of the civilians have been taken to temporary accommodation in a Russian-controlled area of Donetsk. Others will be taken to Ukrainian-held territory, but they'll have to travel across the front line where fierce battles are raging. ABC correspondent Nick Dole reports from Shevchenko in southeastern Ukraine.
Across the fertile fields of Ukraine's southeast, a fierce battle is raging and the momentum can change in an instant. Ukrainian troops have taken us near the front line. They've managed to push Russia back here. But a massive missile crater shows the power of Moscow's military assault. The soldiers here say Russian forces are throwing everything they can at this front now that they've pulled back from the capital, Kyiv.
They have much more weaponry, artillery, tanks and soldiers. But we're protecting our assets. The Russians don't hide theirs and they don't seem to care.
You can hear the bangs in the distance. You can see the smoke over there. So that's the Russian front line. We can hear and now see in the distance. These are defensive trenches which the Ukrainians have dug quite quickly, just in case they are pushed further back. They say they haven't had to use them yet.
There's an eerie quiet in the villages near the front line. Most people have left already, but 14-year-old Lesha and his family are staying.
Why are you still living here when there are so many bombs around?
This is normal, he replies. This is how it is now.
So this is a result of Russian artillery, which you can probably hear right now. It was some distance from here, but we're told they are now moving more towards our position, so it's our cue to leave.
And just moments later comes a deafening roar. It's a Ukrainian jet, we're told. It's firing flares to stop a potential missile from locking on. The stakes are high here. If Russia can make it north to Zaporizhia, it will tighten its grip on this region. For soldiers like Doc, it's personal.
In Zaporizhia, I have a family. I've got a wife and family to fight for, and a home to protect.
Motivation like that is helping drive Ukraine's defence, and it's foiling Vladimir Putin's plans. Nick Dole, ABC News, Shevchenko.
Health is shaping as the central focus of next week's WA state budget, with the government struggling to get on top of crowded hospital emergency departments and continuing problems with ambulance ramping. With ambulances spending more than 5,000 hours ramped last month, the government hopes a $250 million spend will go some way towards easing the pressure points.
With emergency departments under pressure and ambulance ramping at crisis levels, the McGowan government plans to devote some of its huge surplus to solving some of its biggest health problems.
The health spend is a third of the budget. It's a third of the budget. It's the biggest single allocation of spending that government makes. It's also one of the most important.
Opening a new secure mental health facility, the government will spend another $74 million to move patients out of emergency and into more appropriate care. And there's $5 million for trialling technology to help triage patients on their way to hospital.
Freeing up much needed capacity and allowing our ambulances to get back out on the front line to service the community much quicker.
Premier Mark McGowan is optimistic about the new measures and believes as the peak of the pandemic passes, the impact on hospitals will reduce.
Hopefully, as COVID diminishes, some of those pressures will be removed from the system, and combined with this huge investment into emergency departments, a big difference will be made.
But others believe the pandemic is no excuse for record ambulance ramping.
This is not something that has been brought on by COVID. This is something that's been brewing for half a decade.
3 days after the lifting of mask mandates and other restrictions, daily cases dropped below 6,000. But it remains to be seen whether that will hold. And the jury is out on whether relaxed measures have started to breathe life into Perth's CBD.
What do you think of the new mask rules at work?
Oh, I love it. She might not.
You can tell that the city is a lot busier today, definitely, yeah.
I don't think it's changed, to be honest. Everyone's too comfortable working from home still.
At this CBD bar and cafe, trade hasn't changed much since the rules were relaxed, but the owner tells me that bookings generally flow later in the week, so he's still crossing his fingers that the end of this mask mandate will bring a boost to business.
How many people are really coming back to the office and how many offices have adapted to that working from home. So at the moment, Thursday is the new Friday because many people are working from home on Fridays, but if that's going to be the same this week, that's all to be found out.
240 people remain in hospital and 6 in ICU. James Carmody, ABC News.
For some, it's the holy grail of aviation, flying from the east coast of Australia direct to London and New York. Qantas has announced it's pressing ahead with the service while it's still recovering from the impacts of the pandemic.
From Sydney to New York or London in one hit, 20 hours on an ultra long-haul flight certainly isn't for everyone.
This is our longest one for both of us, 14 hours, so another 6 on top of that wouldn't be great.
It sounds a bit crazy, to be honest, 20-hour flights.
Off the back of its most popular route, Perth to London, Qantas is banking passengers will be lining up for the next round of ultra long-haul flights when they take off in 2025.
These flights are only a little bit longer from what you get today.
Confident the pandemic is behind it, the airline is spending big on up to 300 aircraft, including 12 new A350s, which will be specially fitted out for long-haul flights. They'll include an exercise zone and more room in economy, although most of the seats will be premium.
It's not going to be for your backpackers wanting to go on their great European holiday.
The planes will emit 25% less carbon per seat.
If you go to travel agent, Google Flights, anything online, you can actually see your carbon emission before you decide on which airplane to fly on.
Qantas tested the flights in 2019, but the project was put on hold when the pandemic hit. It posted a $1.7 billion loss last year.
And we always said that Qantas needed to transform to survive. We were 11 weeks from going bankrupt in 2020.
The headaches aren't over for Qantas. Recently, there have been issues with staff shortages and frustrated customers facing delays getting refunds. Qantas has ambitions to expand the ultra long-haul flights to Brisbane and Melbourne. Phoebe Bowden, ABC News, Sydney.
The Fremantle Dockers are dealing with more COVID issues, with forward Rory Lobb one of a number of players set to miss Friday's home game against North Melbourne after entering the AFL's health protocols. Lobb was a no-show at training, where masks and distancing were the order of the day as the